Okay. All righty. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
So we wanted to delve tonight into the identity of Avraham Avinu. We know that he comes on the scene and Baruch Hu moves completely in his direction. He earns the remarkable accolade of being the father of not only the Jewish people, but of all organized religions. And until this day, we continually claw back to him. We associate with him. We shout our connectedness to him in each of our tefillot. So what I wanted to do tonight, built from what we touched on the last couple of weeks and connecting them in a way that I think is interesting, is to understand who he is. Really, what is he? To say he's Ish Chesed, it's true, he was maybe the giant of Chesed, as we believe, yes. But there's much more than that. So we're going to do a very quick recap of what we talked about the last few weeks. And then we're going to go into some, what I believe are fabulous sources, fascinating sources, that will ultimately take us to a place where we'll understand who Avraham Avinu is. That's our goal for tonight. So, quick recap. We said a couple of weeks ago that the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu orders the world, everything in the reality that we can grasp is within the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, within the Aleph ad Taf, and how those letters are organized, will give us all the reality that we can possibly understand in the human existence. So the headline is, it's all there in God's words with his letters. Drop down one. If that's true, then word structure means a lot, and sentence structure means a lot. And what we did in the last couple of weeks is we looked at word structure and sentence structure in the first few psukim of Bereshit. Further along in the first perek, we're going to look a little at the second perek tonight. Then we're going to jump ahead to Lech Lecha. But when you look at some of those psukim, particularly the first one, Bereshit bara Elokim, what you see is a purposely unordered pasuk, verse, purposely added words to force us to get into it, to rip it apart, to turn the words upside down, and to learn on the level that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to learn, which means we over time establish a knowledge of the language and a knowledge of language structure. And what came out from all of that was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu simply wanted to describe the creation of the world for us to check back on it historically, so to speak, or scientifically, so to speak. He would have said things very differently. And the way he says them shouts the following. It shouts that there was a soft creation. As we detailed, our rabbis say it was 10 ma'amarot, 10 sayings, as opposed to dibirot. Ma'amarot are soft language, open-ended, collaborative, embracing. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world with 10 ma'amarot, actually 9 plus the first pasuk, to tell us, to shout to us that this is an open process, that it's a continuous process, that it's a collaborative process. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu deliberately goes further. In one of those sayings, rather than decreeing or proclaiming verbally that something should happen, he turns to the Aretz, to the land, to the Kadur Aretz, the globe, and he says, bring forth vegetation. And over there we see a fascinating and not unique exchange where the land A has the capacity to do it. God doesn't do it, the land does it. And more interestingly, as we said, The land does it the way it wants to do it, in a way that it feels makes more sense. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up the world structure within Lashon HaKodesh, within the Hebrew language. Ordering of words, structure of words, order of sentences. Within that, then, now that we become super alert and aware of all of these kinds of things, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to play with the sentences. What does he do? He does it so he teaches us messages and meta messages. What's one of the main meta messages of Bereshit? To understand that that which was created has the capacity to create. Fine, we've all learned that before. That which was created has the capacity to create. But when we look at the Psukim, as we did last week and the week before, we see that which was created has the capacity to create and to decide how and when and in what structure it wants to create it. So everything around us has a soul, has a spirit, and more importantly, has a will. It has the will to do. How does that culminate? It culminates when HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates man. When he turns to all that was created up until that point, and he says, okay, y'all, let's get together. Naaseh Adam, b'samenu kidmutenu, we're all going to collaborate. And what are you talking about? The fish and the birds and the donkeys and the trees and the sun and the moon and the rivers and the air and the horizon and the universe are going to collaborate and create man. That's right. Because again, we're paying particular attention to the language, to the sentence structure, to the individual letters. Naaseh Adam, we will make man. It's not some guy writing it where he was loose with his language. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu writing it where he's reaching out to us and saying, come after me on this stuff. See it and learn from it. Beautiful. Good. So where do we end up then? We end up that everything in the creative process is dynamic, it's expressive, it can make choices, and so be it. Good. Okay. Quick recap. Now we start the second perek, which is really interesting. As Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, the second perek of Bereshit, which essentially retells the story of the creation, but tells it differently, is telling it differently to talk about the different aspects of man. We're going to leave that for 1 or 2 classes from now. But what we're going to focus on is the first pasuk, which is Ele Todot Hashamayim Va'aretz. This is the lineage. This is the story of Shamayim and Aretz. Remember that Shamayim and Aretz, that heavens and earth I told you about? I'm going to tell you about them again. Behi Bar'am, as they were created, Biyom Asot Hashem Elokim Shamayim Va'aretz. What is going on here? You already told me the story. You're about to tell me the story again. Now you're telling me that was the story, but this is the story? The pasuk is very, very challenging. And therefore, our rabbis are going to be doresh. They're going to be digging deeper into this pasuk. We're going to take another 2 minutes and then I'm going to come back to it. But keep in mind, second perek, we finished the whole story of Bereshit, including the story of Gan Eden and Shabbat. We start all over again. At the beginning of that, the Humash starts out by saying, this is the story, Behi Bar'am, as they were created. And guess what? The Hey in the Behi Bar'am is shrunk. It's minimized. Do we read it? Do we read it with less emphasis? Very, very, very curious. We'll talk about that in a minute. Going a little bit further, it says that the Chol Siach HaSadeh, that all of that which was created didn't come into existence yet. 1 second. Didn't you tell me in the first chapter that it all came and HaKadosh said, Vayar Hashem ki tov, he loved it, he saw it, he liked it? This next pasuk qualifies it all, and this is all going in a very specific direction. We'll grab it in a minute. Qualifies it all by saying that everything was there fully built and tooled, ready, but ki va'adam ayin la'avod et ha'aretz. 1 second. Nothing could really take shape. Nothing can become active, fully active, because man wasn't yet fully active. Oh, 1 second. So what does that mean? Let's see. First, everything is created before man. Everything is created before man. Beautiful. When it's time to create man, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to everything he created and he says, what do you say? Do you want to create man? And in a collaborative effort based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's invitation, all of what was created joins him, Kivyachol, to create man. Beautiful. Then we see the second Perek start with a very curious language in the Pasuk about recounting how all that was created already, immediately followed by a Pasuk that says, but listen everybody, all of that was created already was in some pre-existence state because man hadn't yet fully vested in the earth to worship, to work the land and to worship God. So, what is this telling us? That there seems to be this contingency that whatever would be in the world and its existence is absolutely contingent on man. You know what? It's true. We know that. Not necessarily a new idea. But the Torah goes out of its way to emphasize very, very strongly that all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created and all the hitztarfut, all the collaboration that he asked for, so to speak, that gathered together to create the pinnacle of creation, man, none of that was activated until man became active. And what was that activity of man? And again, we'll talk about this more later on. That activity of man was involvement in the world and involvement with God. Good. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu then, Perek Sheni, describes for the second time, the creation of man, he says that Vayitzer ha'adam et ha'adam afar min ha'adama, vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim, vayifki ha'adam the nefesh chaya. What does that mean? Vayitzer has two yudim, two of the yuds, which again, like we said, everything is in the 22 letters, all of reality, everything. Yes, Harry.
I went and got my Tanakh. Like, I want to follow along. Where are you?
You're in Perek Bet, the second Perek of Bereshit, the 7th Pasuk.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, shaped man, formed man. Vayitzer is Yitzirah. It's an artisan. It's an artist. It's a craftsman. So what is this term saying? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu put those finishing touches on man. Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim. And he gave us this extra capacity. We've talked about it in the past. We'll just remind ourselves quickly. Vahi adam the nefesh chaya. What do our rabbis say? That the Vayitzer with the two yudim, with the extra yud, tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us koach tachton v'koach elyon, meaning that for man, even though man is created within our structure of the physical world, there is absolutely no issue with us reaching into the spiritual world and touching it. It's a very big point, right? I'm saying, I'm down here. I live down here. How do my prayers, how do my actions, how do my thoughts have anything to do with the world beyond me? But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim vayitzer et ha'adam, there's a yitzirah there that's dual-fold, that's multi, that's combination, that's beyond what the limitations of the rest of creation are. And that duality opens the door for man to pray here and be heard there, to act here and to be recorded there, to think here and to be recorded there. We take it for granted. We say, of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears everything I say. Of course he knows what I think. Of course he understands what I do. What do you mean, of course? What do you mean? We have the word Vayitzed with 2 Yudim. And that tells us that this seamless connection, this boundaryless connection is real, and it's based on creation. It's beyond the basics. It's absolutely built into creation. Okay. Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim says something else. And all this again is leading us in the direction of understanding who Avraham Avinu was. Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim, as we've talked about before, is that capacity of the human being for self-sacrifice. It's the capacity of the human being to move beyond himself, to see something greater than himself. This is a very big attribute that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim. A person can see a greater good. He can work for a greater goal. He can think beyond himself. The monkey can't do that. The kangaroo can't do that. The kangaroo can be mitzaref to the other elements of creation to build a greater good. And in that respect, yes, they can think beyond themselves. But man can think decades beyond, millennia beyond. He has the capacity to go completely outside of his physical constructs. Okay. So that's how we understand the story so far. Good. Now, in the Midrash Tanchuma, Rav Tachlifa says the following. He says, you know that pasuk, Sari, that you have in front of you? Go back to the first pasuk in the second perek. Ele todot hashamayim va'aretz bihibar'am. Rav Tachlifa says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avraham. And now we'll just begin to get a sense of who Avraham Avinu is. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avraham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham, hibatati ubarati et haolam. What? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham Avinu, Rav Tachlifa is using the word Bihi Baram, and he's changing it to Be'avraham.
Oh, wow.
And he's saying, Avraham, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I looked at you, and based on you, I created the world. Spectacular. Spectacular. It reminds us of the Ma'amar of Chazal when they say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and based on that created the world. But now we're going even one step further. HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow looks at Avraham Avinu in a world that wasn't yet created, and based on Avraham Avinu, what he is and would be ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. And where does Rav Tachlifa get that from? Going back to our logic, which our rabbis give us, which is you have to look at every word, you have to look at every letter, you have to look at sentence structure. And if a sentence is deliberately made a little bit difficult, in this case, if the letter is small, the hey, and the pasuk seems to be repetitive, our rabbis say, bidoresh. And the Tanchuma says, when you doresh something, it means you need to create a grand insight as a result of it. And what is that, according to him? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at Avraham Avinu, and based on who Avraham is, he goes forward in creating the world. So, we had a question of who is Avraham, right? If ever we had that question, the question becomes infinitely greater now. Because now we understand that according to this, that without Avraham, none of us would be here. that the world as we know it would never have been created. That the inspiration, that the incentive that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needed, so to speak, kivyachol, we're doing all this in our terminology, to create the world was Avraham Avinu. Good. So we're going to continue. There's a Ma'amar in Avot Rabbi Natan that says a very, very beautiful thing. He says, who is Avraham Avinu? He says, Avraham Avinu is Mr. Lech Lecha. That's who he is. And how do we understand Avraham Avinu? We understand him by his movement, by his challenges, by his tests. Okay, we all know this. The words Lech Lecha, though, and just hold on to this thought, which we'll develop it further, means go for you. We understand, right? Pashut. Lech Lecha, go for you. So the Avot Rabbi Natan says the following. As we all know, Avraham Avinu went through 10 tests. But this Ma'amar groups the tests in a fascinating way. They said 2 tests that Avraham goes through alone. Talk about that. 2 tests he goes through with his sons, one with Yitzchak, one with Ishmael. He goes through 2 tests, one with each wife, one with Sarah, one with Hagar. He goes through 1 test with the kings in the war he fought. He goes through 2 tests directly, intimately with Borei Olam, with the Brit Milah, with his circumcision, and with the Brit Ben Abetarim, that extraordinary moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself to him in the most spectacular way we are made to understand, and promises him in the most uncertain terms the land, lineage, and a forever legacy. And the first one, of course, which is with Nimrod and Ur Kasdim. Fine. Our rabbis say that Avraham exited all of these tests shalem. So I'll ask you guys, why would the rabbis say that he exited them shalem? And what does shalem mean? What do you think?
Fully.
Huh?
Fully complete.
Complete, beautiful. So tell me, so flesh it out a little bit. What does it mean that he came out complete as opposed to what?
Like I would say like complete meaning like wholeheartedly.
More, yeah, go further. Wholehearted, what does that mean? Give me a simpler word. What does it mean? Yeah, Audrey.
He succeeded. He succeeded.
He succeeded, but more than that, what does that succeeded? They said shalem. What does shalem mean?
He did it full, wholly, like Sari said, wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly, but shalem.
How about complete?
Peacefully. Full circle. Got it.
Complete knowledge of Hashem. Complete. Not maybe. Oh, I went through this test that Hashem put in front of me and I got through, and I am now complete because I am aware and conscious there is a Hashem, there is a God.
So was he not complete before?
He had to go through the test to be complete. He had to go through the test to be complete.
Is it possible that that the Torah is telling us that he came out complete, meaning he wasn't weakened in his greatness or his love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he wasn't weakened in his resolve to build, that he wasn't weakened in his authenticity and his completeness?
Who would say that?
You might say that he came
He was strengthened. He was strengthened.
Good. Hi, Lisa. We can't see you, but we hear you. You could say he was strengthened, but then we might have used a different word. We might have said bechozek, bekoach. You probably said bekoach, stronger, right? Emotionally stronger. Shalem, I'm going to connect what you guys are all saying. Shalem means not dinged, not weakened in who he was. So he went through a test with Ishmael, throwing him out. A test with Hagar, throwing her out. A test with Yitzhak, bringing a knife to his neck. A test with Lot, having to take up arms and fight a war. Having to go get circumcised at a very senior age in his life, and on and on and on, until the point even when he buries his wife, when he's tested there as well.
So he stayed himself, but he got strengthened by Hashem.
He got strengthened by Hashem. Okay, he comes out shalem. Now,
maybe more like
more
clear-headed,
more
clear-minded.
He's complete. He's undented. He's unbroken, right?
Ricky, doesn't the Torah say about Pinchas that he acquired shalom, peacefulness?
Shalom, beautiful. So you know,
yes, peaceful.
I love it. Beautiful. Let's build it on the word shalom. It's beautiful. That's where we want to be. Now, wouldn't you want to say, I'm going to base it on what Lisa and Audrey are saying, wouldn't you want to say that he came out with shalva, he came out with a clear head, he came out with
Avraham.
He came out with calm, with a sense of calm,
Yes,
with a clear head, but it doesn't say that. In other words,
he felt accomplished. He felt accomplished.
True, but I think the Torah is saying something very important. I think the Torah is saying it's about shlemut and not shalva and nachat ruach, meaning that it's not about quietude. It's not about complacency. It's not about, that's not life. Avraham Avinu doesn't come out feeling satisfied, humbled by what he did, by what he achieved. He doesn't come out that way. Because shalva, or peace of mind, or quietude, is not the goal. It's shlemut. And how does a person achieve shlemut? By being tested and raising the bar again and again. So let's just hold as a sidebar that he comes out shalem, and I'm going to build from what you guys said. He comes out complete, unbroken, unwavered, unlessened. He doesn't become less of a person as a result of his experiences. He doesn't become less connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't become less of a firebrand in his commitments to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it has nothing to do with shalva. It has nothing to do with complacency. Complacency is not the value. It's not the value. Heroics and authenticity is the value. And how is that achieved? When a person is challenged over and over. And when we're running for complacency to be happy, we're never gonna get it because it's not in our DNA. Shlemut is. So what will make us happy? Being tested and knocking it out successfully with the test. What will never make us happy is trying to avoid the tests to have life and quietude. That's not the Jewish script.
You always used to tell us it's like a heart rate monitor. It has to go up and down, and if it goes straight, you're dead.
That's right. There's no,
I always remembered that.
Ricky always told us, don't pray for shalom.
That's right. We just keep moving. Good. So we're getting closer to understand who he is. We're getting closer to understand who Avraham Avinu is. When Avraham Avinu was tested the last time, the same language is used when he's tested the first time. Same language is used. The first time it says, Lech lecha ma'artzecha nodatecha bet avicha, go from your home and so on and so on, from your friends, from your family, from your business. And in the last test, so to speak, you might say that the test with Sarah's burial was the last test, but let's say that the Akedat Yitzchak was the pinnacle test like the first one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Lech lecha El Eretz Hamoriah, Valeu Sham Le'olah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go to what we end up understanding as Jerusalem, but with the same two Lech Lecha words. So 1 second. Now we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked at Avraham Avinu and decided, so to speak, to create the world. He was inspired to create the world. We understand that Avraham Avinu's persona is based on shlemut, which means stepping into the furnace of fire and stepping out unscathed, unfrightened, ready to build and keep fighting because he understands that this thing is a forever story. It's not X number of years on this planet. He understands that that there's the connectedness between the two worlds. So Avraham Avinu will come out of the furnace and he'll be shalem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu then says, go to Eretz Amoriah. So Bereshit Rabbah brings down that what was going on here, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu understood the following about Avraham Avinu. And this adds another element to it to help us complete this picture of who Avraham Avinu is. He says that he was like a beautiful fruit that had a beautiful fragrance wrapped tight in a glass bottle. Now, if you have a beautiful fruit with a beautiful fragrance sealed in a glass bottle, what happens?
It'll die.
It won't make it, right? And its fragrance can't be.
It doesn't have an essence. Nobody could smell it.
Exactly. No one can smell it. So what does the Rabbi Berachia say? He says that the way that the cork on the bottle was loosened, so to speak, was by Avraham Avinu moving. Lech lecha, lech lecha, movement. He says in every one of his 10 tests, there was movement. In other words, he says that it was essential for Avraham Avinu to express his shlemut, his perfection, his authenticity, his completeness by experiencing things, again, not shalva, not peace and quietude, that ain't the script, but it was no less important for Avraham Avinu to do so in a public way. It had to be a problem with a challenge with his wife, with Paro, with Avimelech. It had to be a challenge with his son that other people would see and hear about. Not only that, these challenges had to be written in the Torah so we would read about them forever. Why not skip them? How many things went on in the greatest of men and women's lives? Not everything is recorded. HaKadosh Baruch Hu records them for a purpose. So the reach, the smell of them, the beautiful scent, the upliftingness of them would touch us. Good. So, who was Avraham Avinu? We still don't know exactly, but we do know that without him, the world wouldn't be here, according to the Tanchuma, and none of us would be here. But it goes further. Our rabbis say the following. They say that in Avraham Avinu is each Jewish person, and in Avraham Avinu is the collective nation of Jews, meaning the 10 challenges, the 10 tests that Avraham Avinu went through, that's the way it works in life. The aversion to shalva and the interest in shlemut, the aversion to complacency and the interest in authenticity and completeness and strength, having gotten stronger from the life experiences, that's the way it is. And in each person that lives his life, see Avraham in your life because he saw you in his. In fact, it's heightened by our tefillot and the Kiryat Sefer Torah on Rosh Hashanah when we read the story of Akedat Yitzchak. And we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we tell him, Hashem, please connect us back to Avraham Avinu. Remember Avraham Avinu and remember us with him. What do we have to do with him? He lived almost 5,000 years ago, 4,600 years ago. What do we have to do with him? No. We have everything to do with him if we are modeled after him. So, quick recap, then we pull the last major point together.
So he could have stayed in his tent alone while he was getting his Brit Milah in pain. Instead, he opened up and he had movement and he shared and had Hachnasat Orchim.
Very good.
Also with Akedat Yitzchak, the same thing. He could have been in sorrow and didn't go to the top of the mountain, but he went and he announced it and he had movement with it.
Very good. Beautiful. So he did it and God did it. And it was the only way it was going to be. And then exactly. And then it was going to be recorded forever. Now, when we go back to the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that he looked at Avraham, and based on Avraham, and now we reminded ourselves of the spectacularness of his life. And again, our lives parallel that because we've been brought to the mountain also. We've been brought to the cliff also. Everybody has, and everybody will. And you know what? That's the way it better work, because that's the way life is. And that's the way you earn Shlemut. So our rabbis say as follows. And Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz brings this down in a fascinating way. He writes the following, that Bnei Avraham, us, the Jewish people, are the only nation in the history of the world that have had a profound influence on the world without ever having military power or financial power. You have to hear this again. It's extraordinary. He says the Jewish people are the only people in the world whose influence on the world had nothing to do with worldly based power. By design, we were one of the smallest nations in the world and a weak nation, as opposed to the Muslims who converted millions of people through war and conquering, as opposed to the Christians who converted millions of people through crusades, through war, through the sword. We never had any of that.
Can I suggest that because the Jewish people were the people who had a consciousness that there is a God, that there is a living God that created the world and created the human with a knowing and a consciousness of what he created, the universe, the planets. They don't have consciousness. They don't know we're here, but we know they're there. So the human being really is the king, because we know Hashem is there. Hashem created this, that, everything. They don't know we're created. The objects don't know, don't have the, should I call it sechel? I don't know. Don't have the knowing, but we do. And that's why Avraham is our father, because Avraham is the first one to know Hashem. Before Abraham was all idols. But he said, no, it's not the idols I created. It's this beautiful God that's created the universe. We know that, but the universe does not know that.
Now, you're that perfect. But the shocker is that this absolute truth and seeing God, so to speak, understanding God that Abraham started is enough to beat the Crusaders, the Cossacks, the Nazis, on and on and on and on and on, the communists, on and on and on and on. What do you mean? We never raised the sword to defend ourselves. We defended ourselves, to your point, Audrey, with our knowledge and our conviction. That's it. That's what won the day. And
That's the
that's the
secret.
extraordinariness of us. And by the way, Avraham Avinu wasn't a crusader either. He wasn't a warrior, but he won. He beat everybody. He stood on one side of the world, so to speak, and everybody else stood on the other. And he didn't raise his sword the way everybody else did. He raised his thoughts. He raised his spirit. He walked. He did. To your point, Audrey, he expressed his commitment over and over, his awareness of God over and over. So the clincher is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at Avraham Avinu and he says, this could work. It could be. There can be a human being and his children who, based on their love of me and their knowledge of me and their commitment to me, God says, will enrich the world and will immeasurably lead the world. And therefore, it makes sense to build a world. Because
Right.
that demonstrates that it is connected. The Jewish people stand as an absolute testimony that there isn't any limited physicality to this world, that we are connected always with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, and that we can influence the heavens, and the heavens want to be touched by us, and the Elyonim and Tachtonim are connected, and on and on and on. And the creative process is dynamic and multifaceted, and all the beautiful things. And we win with our love of God, with our commitment to Torah mitzvot. That's how we win. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kivyachol saw that there could be a man who can do that, and no less important, that his children would continue that it would be just on the power of an idea, of a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and of a commitment. And when he saw that that could happen, L'cha ibadati, I look to you, Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, and based on that, I created the world. And that's what we celebrate. And that's who we are.
And how did Amalek knew how to destroy the Jews. He's the only one that figured it out. And that's take away our Hashem and our.
He was the one that came close. That's right.
He was the only one.
close.
So that's why I say be very careful, everybody, because Amalek is in our midst. They're taking away our Hebrew learning from our children. They're taking away our yeshivot, our praying. We have to be aware of this.
We have to be very careful. I agree.
There's nothing we can do right now. I'm not a political advocate, but we have to be aware and woken up about what is going on.
Yeah,
We
we
need
do. I
to hold
feel the
on to our
same way.
Torah learning.
I feel the same way. Good. So
Sorry.
that's who Avraham is. That's who Avraham is.
No,
Avraham is, Sarah?
No, it's true, Audrey. What's going on now?
Yeah, we have to be very aware. Let's remember that it's not with the koach of the herev. It's not with the power of the sword. Ki'im beruchi amar Hashem. That it's in his spirit. That's what gives us our power. And when you think about it, and when I first saw this idea in Berkowitz's work, I said, now I finally get it. I finally understand who Avraham Avinu is. I finally understand who we are. And I now finally understand this ma'amad that says that once HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, looked at Avraham, he says, this thing is going to be great. It's going to work. It has eternal value.
Didn't he say that also with Noah? He matzachen ben Noah.
Yeah, so it's a very important question, Sarah. It's a very important question on why Noah didn't become the guy, but Avraham did. And we're going to look at that in a couple more, either next week or the following week. We're going to look at why not Noah. We're going to look at him after Avraham for a reason. I want us to understand Avraham, and I think we did a pretty good job tonight. But to your point, why wasn't it Noah? He was the greatest of his generation. He was a giant. He was Sadiq.
He spent his whole life up.
Yeah. So we have to understand his greatness because he was unparalleled in his greatness. And we have to understand exactly what was lacking. I wanted to wait a little bit till we talk a little bit more about Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And then we're going to talk about Noah as well. And you'll see exactly what didn't quite work with him. And for our perspective now, it's about living the life of Avraham Avinu, about understanding that we face a world, we're in a world where the power of the sword, the power of the dollar, attempts and always has throughout history has attempted to rule the day. And for brief periods in time, those nations with that power had a surface level sense of control. But we have the ultimate power. By Pach Ba'apad Nishmat Hayim, by Hida Nefesh Chaya, we are Avraham Avinu's children. And the same way that he won without ever dominating anyone, by just walking around and letting the beauty of his persona and his courage and his greatness be seen by those around him, that's how we do it. We do the same thing.
To your point, the major religions accept Abraham as their father, as their
Right,
father.
that's right. Hmm?
Must have made an impact on all the nations.
Absolutely. And now, to Audrey's point, we have to protect that because there's an assault on all religions, not only on our religion, an assault on all religions. And we need to be as strong as we can and to grow stronger. And it's in our best interests that anybody who believes in God stays believing in God. When they close churches, unless those people become Torah observant Jews, it's not a good thing for us either. Because someone with a God is infinitely better than someone with no God. And that's what we have to be very aware of. But we have Avraham Avinu as our patriarch, as our courageous protector, and we keep following in his ways, and that's where we need to be. Any other thoughts, questions?
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you all.
Thank
We're
you.
going to dedicate tonight's class to my mother, Alea Shalom.
Beautiful.
Today is her birthday, and so the Loy Nishmata, that our learning and all of the quote and good things that come from the learning should be to the Loy Nishmata. Thank
Amen.
you,
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
everybody.
Amen. Lila Tov, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.